Hello, and welcome to the Beyond Borders podcast, the podcast that explores topics related to international trade. This podcast is brought to you by Buckland. For over 70 years, Buckland has been working to help companies across the world experience global trade in a better way. As a customer-focused company, we provide you with a single source of unmatched customs brokerage, trade-managed solutions, freight forwarding, trade technologies, and warehousing and distribution services. I'm your host, Jenny Kaus, Corporate Marketing Manager at Buckland, and today we are sharing a special initiative that has recently been undertaken at Buckland in response to COVID-19 to assist our team members. Buckland has launched the only at Buckland Mental Health and Wellness Lecture Series, which is taking place over the course of 4 weeks and features Jennifer Harkness, who is a psychotherapist and has a counseling and art therapy practice called Courageous Heart Healing. We have found these sessions with Jen to be incredibly insightful and useful, so we are sharing them with the hope that they are helpful for others as well. The second of our 4 sessions is called Relationships and Mental Health During Crisis, and you will now hear the audio from a recent Zoom call that Jennifer held with our company on this topic. Without any further ado, over to Jennifer.
Today, we're going to talk about relationships and mental health during a crisis, and hopefully, the talks are really designed to build off of one another. And today, global pandemics turn up the volume on whatever was already there. So if there's pre-existing conditions, it turns up the volume on that. Certainly, if you live alone and, you already maybe were struggling with loneliness, it's going to turn up the volume with that. If you live in a household, even the households that people get along really, really well, we're on the end of week 6 here in Seattle, Washington, and everybody's getting on everybody's nerves at this point. So that's a normal thing. And then certainly if there is already strife in your home, the volume's up on that as well. So we're going to talk about all that today. The talks, Shirley and I talked Wednesday about this a little bit. Just so you know, so you can best use these talks. I've designed them to build off of one another. There's a lot of information. I'm not expecting anybody to take in all the information that I'm giving. I really have designed the handouts and the talks you can go back and review them. And, it's like anything in life, how you use it is what you're going to get out of it. So, but with that said, there's a couple things that hopefully each talk, they're like the main points we're wanting to pull out of them. So the first talk was really just the brain part of like you have a puppy in your brain that is your body and your emotions and that you need to attend to it so your thinking brain can function in an optimal way. And today, the main focus is really about relationships. Now, last time we talked about at the beginning that this is a collective trauma. Okay. Why are relationships, why are feelings important? Okay. Like they're important because they're one of the main factors of resilience in mitigating ongoing symptoms of trauma. So Shirley had asked me, what do you think? Are we going to have like residual effects of this pandemic moving forward, like even generationally? And nobody really knows. We're in the midst of trauma right now. We won't know what meaning we're going to make of it or, how it's going to play out until much later. However, connecting with one another, connecting with ourselves, talking about feelings can really be a healing process to not have such acute symptoms lasting moving forward. So again, last talk was you got to really attend to your emotions and your body first. Part of that is because of needs, right? So some of you might have heard of Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. It's like a basic psychology premise. And the last talk was really about like body and safety and security, like your base needs, right? If you are struggling with shelter, you're struggling with food, warmth, just basic physical safety, it's going to be really hard to kind of go up this ladder of needs, right? So that's why the first talk focused on that. Today, we're going to talk a lot about belonging and love, right? Connection with others. And the next talk, we're really going to go into more of like productivity, esteem, and agency, and like being your best self. So hopefully, again, they'll build on one another, and you can go back and review them as well. So the interesting thing about humans is at any given moment, you have this little chain of events going on. So every time we do anything, you've got a sensation, you've got a primary feeling, you've got a need, emotion, and thought behind the behavior. So an example of this is, if I'm cold, right? The sensation in my body is some tension and a feeling of cold. The primary feeling, which primary feelings are joy, anger, sadness, fear, right? Might be like some fear, like, oh, nobody wants to be cold. That can be dangerous. So the need is, I want to get warmed up. The emotion might be irritation. The thought is, I'm going to get a blanket. And the behavior would be going and getting a blanket, right? So that's a very simple chain of this. And then, of course, sometimes the needs are, I need to be heard, or I need to be seen. And it gets a little bit more complicated when it's emotional needs. But the needs can be physical, emotional, relational, mental. They can be any of those things. So I just want to highlight that everybody's got needs behind their behavior, and your body and your thoughts and your behaviors all chain together and with your emotions. So some examples of the pandemic, right? I'm going to give some examples I've been talking about with clients and that I've experienced in my own personal life. So when this all started, for instance, we all heard on the news, right, the run on toilet paper, and everybody was like, this is crazy. Why is everybody running on toilet paper, right? And I, as a therapist, was like, well, they have a need for security right now. And that is the way that they're trying to resource that need. Or my partner, he is obsessed with the news. He's watching the news constantly. He wants to talk about the news constantly. And for me, it's pretty annoying, I got to tell you, because I have a need for peace and kind of I need a little break from COVID at times. But his need behind that is a need to know, to have some sense of control, right? Of understanding what's happening. So I can have that perspective with him and have a little compassion. One thing I know, there's a lot of divisiveness, right, going on in the news and opinions and all these kinds of things. And early in the pandemic, I had a friend who was going out sailing and going out in public regardless of the stay at home. And I was getting really mad, super frustrated and mad about this happening. And I had to kind of sit with it and say what's going on with my own, needs and feelings inside. And what I realized is that I have a need for safety. And so when I saw my friend doing that and going out and going against the stay-at-home orders, it was triggering. It was pushing that button in my brain for a need for safety. And my puppy wanted to bark and bite and growl. And I wanted to send a bunch of articles and what for, this is why you shouldn't do it. And then I realized at a certain point that wasn't actually helpful, right? That my friend was coping the way they were coping. I was coping the way I was coping. And it helped regulate my nervous system to have that understanding of my own need and to understand that my friend's need, right, was freedom. That my friend needed a lot of freedom and that he was feeling too cooped up and unable to cope just being at home, right? So just giving some tangible COVID specific examples, because I've heard this a lot with people of getting frustrated with friends or loved ones or just people in the news, that sort of thing. And, doing a little bit of that emotional labor and digging below it can help with connection. Another thing that I see in the pandemic is, the need of introversion versus extroversion. So we hear these terms a lot. A lot of times people get them confused with shy and outgoing, but they're actually not. It's more about how you recharge. So introverts, I'm actually really outgoing. I'm super friendly and gregarious, but I'm very introverted. I recharge by being by myself the most. So other people might be shy, but be extroverted. They recharge going out to parties. Maybe they don't talk a lot at the party, but they recharge by being around a lot of people. In the pandemic, I have noticed that the introverts up front were definitely doing a lot better, right? I think it's because, some people, the pace and being around other folks was actually pushing their stress buttons and was a little bit dysregulating. So I had, for instance, clients that were having multiple panic attacks a week prior to the pandemic, like going to school or going to work, that when the pandemic hit, they were like, no, I'm good. I'm fine. Like I have no anxiety now, especially folks with like social anxiety and that sort of thing. And then what I've noticed with the pandemic, people who have a real need to be around other people and are very social are struggling more because you can't get that need met right now. You're at home. And so that's been tough, for a lot of folks. And I just wanted to name that as those are basic needs, and understanding whether you're more introverted or extroverted, or there's ambiverts right in the middle. Just knowing what those needs are and resourcing for them, and knowing for those extroverts that, we can do parties via Zoom and stuff, but it's not quite the same. And so it's definitely disappointing. So the thing with needs is, when we get them met, we tend to have positive feelings, right? We're like content, satisfied, happy. And when they're not met, we have more challenging feelings. We're frustrated, we're irritated, we're sad, right? So part of the reason I'm bringing up needs in this talk is it's really about how we resource the needs and resource them in healthy ways. And again, back to the relationship. So with the brain science, we are literally wired for belonging. We're wired for connection. Like way back again, when we were like cave people learning how to survive, we had to belong to a group to survive. We couldn't just go out on our own and do that. So we need belonging. And that's one of the reasons why it's regulating and why it's important to focus on it. And it's also a reason why people are stressed right now, because we are connecting in very different ways or very little right now because of the pandemic and social distancing. So, we talked last time about name it to tame it with the puppy, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to attune and bond, especially in your households. If you are in close proximity with people right now, like I said at the beginning, there's some tension that's coming up. I think we're all running a marathon. I know this week a theme was everybody's just really tired, like exhausted this week. I know I have been. And part of that is because, again, this is a constant stress. Our bodies are under a constant stress, whether we explicitly understand that or name that or not, it's there. So talking about it is really important. Asking our loved ones, hey, how are you feeling? And doing so in a way that's open-ended, not like, I'm asking you so I can fix it, or I'm asking you with an agenda, but just a simple, hey, how are you feeling right now? And ways to attune to that are if I said, hey, I'm feeling tired and stressed, right? You can reflect back just simply the same words. I hear you feel tired and stressed, or you reflect back. It's almost like attunement's like tuning forks with musicians, right? You're trying to get the forks to resonate together, right? So you open up with some empathy and try to resonate to, oh, I really understand what feeling tired and stressed is like right now. And you can share your own feelings. Hey, I feel tired and stressed too. So there's connection. It's really basic active listening skills. You can also ask open-ended questions like, what's stressing you out the most right now, right? It's about getting curious and connecting and giving permission to express and just holding a person in the space that they're at. Feelings language, right? Again, it's regulatory for the puppy, but it's also about efficiently meeting those needs. So I'm going to go back to the example of my partner listening to the news nonstop. So I would get done with a day of work listening to COVID stress all day, and he spends a lot of time alone for his work. And so he'd be very excited to talk, right? He's more extroverted. I'm more introverted. If you can see, there's like a clash of needs already going on. And then he would say, oh, I want to tell you about all the latest news and specifically, like what's going on in the US with Trump, right? And I would instantly feel my button and my brain get pushed, right? And I'd start getting stressed because I have a need for peace in that moment. So how do you communicate that, right? Now, sometimes you might be a little snarky or something, those moments happen, and we're going to talk about how to repair those. But nonviolent communication is a really effective way to say like, hey, I notice that when you talk about the news and you talk about Trump, I feel really stressed and I have a need for peace and calm right now. And I'm just wondering, can we talk about that like tomorrow morning or something when I'm not so tired? Or can we not talk about that at all for like a week, whatever the request is? And then you negotiate it together, And then maybe he says back, I have a need for connection and I am really needing to know what's going on in the news and want to talk about it. Can we talk about that later? So again, it's about trying to communicate with each other in the least offensive way to create connection and resource for needs. So, they're just some language templates. In the handout, I have resourced a lot of different stuff in the handout for today's talk for you to peruse, right? Vulnerability is a strength. And I've got a cat finally in the illustrations for you cat people. I was thinking about the Cowardly Lion and the Wizard of Oz, right? And the courage of heart, right? And vulnerability is actually a strength. Because it gives permission for everybody else to have their feelings too. And we are feeling-based animals, feeling-based people. So in talking about the feelings, again, regulates the puppy. So when we lead or caretake with vulnerability, right, we're leading by example, and we're actually helping people to perform better when we do that. So that's why talking about feelings is so important. So again, you always want to meet physical needs first, right? And that's why for those people who have lost jobs, are worried about, food or paying bills, that sort of thing, their stress is definitely more at this point, right? And they need those physical resources before you can even really get up into like, okay, I'm going to fine tune the communication in my relationships. And like we talked about last time, comparative suffering isn't helpful. So if you do have food and bills paid, but you're still stressed and struggling, that's also valid, right? And then it's about resourcing for maybe your emotional needs and what's going on there. You don't have to attune to people 100% of the time. In fact, it's actually not good to attune to people 100% of the time because especially with kids, if you try to meet your kids' emotional needs 100% of the time, you actually create more anxiety, right? If you don't attune to them enough, you create neglect and anxiety, right? So you're really shooting for like a 60 to 80% window in there of like the good enough boss or the good enough parent or the good enough caretaker, right? And it's over time. So, we might in a year with our family have a few months where we're just like off our game, right? And we're not really present and meeting a lot of needs. But the rest of the year, we're doing a good enough job. You're putting money in the relational bank to weather those storms, right? And, this also applies to work life, right? And that's why, I'm happy to support the Buckland family, in your organization too, because you're putting money in the bank by checking in with each other and creating trust, basically, so everybody functions better. And hopefully you're learning why that's important in the talks as well. So with that said, putting money in the bank, right? If you've ever heard of love languages, love languages are quality time. So just hanging out together, prioritizing, spending time together, touch, hugs, that sort of thing, acts of service. So cooking meals, washing cars, doing kind things for people, right? Giving gifts or just giving verbal appreciation. Now, back to some examples in my own life, we oftentimes tend to try to attune to people or show love to people in the way that we like to. So like my partner is an acts of service person. So he'll go like wash my car, right? And that's really him saying like, oh, I love you and I really appreciate you. But my love language is more verbal appreciation. Like I actually would rather hear like, oh, good job, Jen. You're so amazing, right? And so I will verbally give that to him and it's kind of like a miss, right? Because he's like, it would be better if you made dinner or something. That would actually hit that need better for him and vice versa if he told me that he appreciated me. So learning your loved one's love language and trying to communicate to them in that way is another way of resourcing needs and creating more connection and putting money in the bank. So reflecting on that can be really helpful. Again, last week we talked about the mirror neurons, right? This is another reason what we're talking about here too is co-regulation. It's another reason for you to take care of yourself and put the oxygen mask on you first, because, especially I'm talking to a lot of moms and the homeschooling is so hard right now for parents and not just moms, but of course, oftentimes women take on that role more. but they're exhausted. They're trying to get kids to motivate and create structure and all these things, and they're getting stressed out and tempers are getting short. You can either join your kids in their chaos, right? Or you can work on really regulating yourself and having them join you in your calm, right? And that's one of the reasons why oxygen mask on you is so important. I also want to put in there, I was reading a chart from some educators today of like realistic expectations on how much education at homeschooling kids need. And I think one of them was like, kindergarten was like 30 minutes a day, right? And I think some parents have the expectation they're supposed to be homeschooling like 7 hours a day right now. And I don't think that that's a very realistic expectation. Now, what's really helpful right now, because we're all in a stress and trauma response, is showing up emotionally for your kids. That right now will have more impact for their nervous systems and create better learning and better functioning over time than pushing homework. So again, the puppy is such a priority. If we really want to thrive, we really want to perform well, we have to address the puppies, and how we do it as caretakers is essential. So empathy and compassion. I was talking about my friend who went sailing, right? Empathy is feeling with somebody, and compassion is understanding maybe another person's experience. You don't have to agree with one another, and you don't have to condone other people's actions. You can totally disagree, and you can even say that's unacceptable to me, while having compassion, right? I still don't agree with my friend going out in public, and I can have compassion for my friend in that and say, oh, I understand why they're doing it. And here's the thing. I communicated that with my friend, just like we're talking about in this talk, and we had some bonding moments over it and some understanding. So the compassion ended up being something that connected the two of us. And it was also just for me, so I could let go of my irritation and anger, right? So compassion is actually for you as well, to understand maybe why people are doing what they're doing. I want to go back to, triggers and the button getting pushed in our brains, right? So, there's threat, change, pain can push that button, but also, there can be buttons pushed on an intellectual level, an emotional level. Like I talked about, maybe a trigger is, not being heard or seen. You have a need for that. And when you don't feel heard and seen, that gets pushed. Triggers can be a lot of different things. And that's why understanding your triggers, understanding your loved one's triggers can be really helpful. And in the handout, there's some charts and some questions to help you navigate that. When this button gets pushed, if it gets pushed hard, it takes about 20 to 40 minutes for the neurohormones in your body to actually calm down. So that's why sometimes we actually need some space and some distraction to get away from it before we come back and talk about it. It's very difficult, again, to talk about what's going on when that button is pushed. So just being aware of, what your personal symptoms are, your physical symptoms. I know for me, my jaw clenches and I start to get really hot. That's an indicator that my button is pushed, and maybe I need to attend to my puppy before I start to speak, right? A lot of people will try to go computer to computer. We talked about this last time. And that feels really dismissive to a lot of people. Trying to go in and fix it, I think men are oftentimes in the West enculturated to do this more, where I'll say to my partner, oh, gosh, I'm so tired and stressed. And he'll come in with well, have you thought about doing this and this and this? And, trying to fix it. And that usually pushes my button more, right? It creates defensiveness in people. So, it's not about that you don't come up with problem solving at a certain point, but it's about attending to the computer first and saying, yes, your feelings are valid. I understand that. And how can I help? Right. There can be shame sometimes in fixing and dismissing feelings when we go in and do that. So again, all of our buttons with this pandemic are pushed to a certain degree all the time. And then things will happen, especially at home, where they get pushed more, right? I am not, as a therapist, I've always said this, I'm not concerned with conflict. Conflict is actually not a bad thing. It's an important thing to build trust. It's how we navigate the conflict that I'm concerned about, because it's inevitable. We are going to have conflict with each other. We're going to get on each other's nerves. how we engage it and how we work through it is really a big hallmark of the quality of our relationships and our trust and how we're regulating and how we learn from the conflict, right? So I always look at conflict as like a growing opportunity, like an opportunity to figure out how to calm down and how to create connection and how to learn from it so we can be even better going forward. So, we're all having some ruptures, in our lives right now, being at home together. And that's actually not a problem. It's really about how we engage it. I'm just going to check time. Okay, perfect. So again, you calm your puppy. You go to sensory-based activities. You try to calm your body down. And then you can pause and have your computer boot up. And then you have access to choice, right? So if my boyfriend says to me, oh, I want to talk about the news and I'm getting really upset about it, if I pause, I'm not going to maybe change my initial reaction, which might be irritation. My puppy wants to bark and growl, right? Or maybe it's just like a shutdown and my puppy wants to like hide and do nothing. But I can pause and I can boot up and say, okay, I'm going to take a break and then I'm going to talk to you about it and create connection. So we don't always have choice in what's happening. We don't always have choice in how we initially feel about it. But if we pause and we regulate, we do have choice in how we respond. And a lot of times when that button gets pushed, we go to like default mode, right? So if again, if your puppy goes to fight mode, that's 9 times out of 10 where you're going to go, right? And it's okay that you're having that initial reaction, but if you can learn to pause, then you can make a different choice in how you respond to others. So that's another reason why all this is so important. The last part about relationship is gratitude and appreciation. So gratitude and choice all live up in your computer, right? And Gottman Institute is very clear about this, that, part of putting money in the bank is gratitude and appreciation. And it's a 5-to-1 ratio. So when we have a complaint, right, we need to have 5 positives because that negativity bias in the brain, our brains will definitely focus more on the challenge than the positive. So, and it can be really simple things like, if my partner brings me coffee in the morning, oh, thank you. I really appreciate it when you bring me coffee, right? We tend to take these things for granted and forget to give appreciation for just the simple things. And then our brains will focus on, like you didn't put too much or you put too much cream and sugar in this or something. We tend to do that as humans. So, really putting some perspective and intention and mindfulness into focusing on the positive, especially in a pandemic. I've been telling everybody, like, celebrate the wins, celebrate the little wins. Like if you take a shower or you eat a salad or go for a walk, or if your partner gives you a hug, like make sure to pause and appreciate that. So the last part of this talk today is going over mental health. Now, this is all really complicated, and I am not diagnosing, obviously, in a talk. What my intention is just to give you some indicators of what to look out for and some resources of where to reach out for help. In the handout, there are all kinds of links to like anxiety scales to kind of look like, where am I actually at on this? And do I need to reach out to a counselor? And different resources in Mexico, Canada, and the US where Buckland is on how to reach out for help. So I want to just talk a little bit about spoon theory. So spoon theory comes from folks with chronic illness. And the theory goes like this. Neurotypical healthy people wake up in the morning with like let's say 20 spoons. And they've got plenty of spoons to go through the day, and every activity like taking a shower, having breakfast, going to work, they take a certain amount of spoons, okay? Let's say by the end of your work day, you've used 10 spoons, and then you have 10 spoons for the evening, okay? Now, people who are neurodivergent, meaning like maybe they have ADHD, a learning disability, autism, if you have mental or physical illness, those folks, they don't wake up with 20 spoons. Maybe they wake up with 15 spoons. Maybe they wake up with 10 spoons. And by the end of the day, either they've spent all their spoons just doing basic stuff, or they have a deficit of spoons, right? So spoon theory has always been a good metaphor in my life for people of like, where are you at with your spoons today? Okay, like how's your energy level is really part of what we're talking about here. And right now in the pandemic, everybody's missing some spoons. Nobody has a full set of spoons when you wake up in the morning right now, just because of the uncertainty and the lack of predictability and the being outside of our routines, all the things we're going through just takes away some spoons. And then some people have even less spoons. So sometimes we need to share spoons, right? So, my partner has more spoons than me. So, sometimes he needs to come in and like help me out on some things because I don't have as many spoons as he does. So looking at, what our energy levels are and how we've been functioning pre-pandemic and in pandemic and sharing resources is really important. So anxiety, everybody has had anxiety to a certain degree. Think about a time when you had a test or a presentation or something that made you feel anxious and stressed. Okay. Everybody has it. Part of anxiety is excitement, right? That's like the flip side. Fritz Perls talks about anxiety is just excitement without breath, right? There's a piece of anxiety that can be motivating, right? Or us preparing to do things. Now, people who have an anxiety disorder, think about that time you were, anxious for a test. They feel like that all the time, right? It's like a constant feeling of anxiety. And again, it's very exhausting. Anxiety is more about hyperarousal, right? The nervous system is just like go, 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 but not really functioning well, but at a heightened state. A lot of times people think about anxiety as worry, but I haven't been worried. But my anxiety oftentimes manifests as irritation, right? So anxiety can actually be irritation. It can actually be shut down in silence. It can be a lot of different things, not just worry. So again, in the handout, there's some anxiety scales. You can look into that more. The question is always like, what's normal, right? If, you're anxious once in a while, that's normal. If it starts to persist over, days, and the scales are usually like 2 weeks, you probably need to talk to somebody and get some support. And of course, mental health counselors, we are trained to do that and provide skills to help. Depression, right, is the hypoarousal. It's the puppy shutting down and going to freeze and faint. And it's really a lot of times about overwhelm. And people, the word depression, like, I'm so depressed. People use that for just being sad for a couple of days. But clinical depression is more than just that. And in fact, some people with clinical depression don't really experience a lot of sadness. They just feel apathy. They feel nothing. A lot of times people will report to me, I just feel empty. You could give me my favorite piece of cake and I would just be like, meh, it doesn't taste like anything. I'm not having any reaction. That's depression, right? So everybody's hypoarousing at certain times during this pandemic. If you're like on the couch for a couple of days and you're like, I just have no motivation, I think that's normal with the stress that we're all under. But if it's lasting more than a few days or it's cycling like every week, like half the week or something like that, it's definitely a time to maybe reach out and talk to somebody about that and get some support. With anxiety and depression, right, your computer's not functioning very well. So a lot of people will fixate on different things. Fixation is also another word for it is ruminating. So thinking about the same things over and over and over. I know at the beginning of the pandemic, I could not stop thinking about getting sick. Like every time I caught my mind wandering, it was like, I'm going to get sick. Right. So part of that is like obsessive thoughts, and giving your mind a healthy job and an outlet to think about something different, is really helpful, when you're fixating. With fixation in mental health, a lot of people run what's called cognitive distortions. So perfectionism, doing a lot of shoulding. I should be coping better. I should be doing this better. Or blame, like, why are they doing this, and fixating on like maybe other people. I think that's partly why my partner fixates on politics. He has a need to fixate on what other people are doing sometimes, and blaming is a way to cope. Really catastrophizing, thinking into the world, going to worst case scenario, black and white thinking. There's a list of cognitive distortions in the handout, but people tend to not be thinking clearly. You can't always believe everything that you're thinking, and that's the tricky part about mental health. So kind of being aware of maybe your own patterns, of thoughts that aren't helping you, can be a good route of self-care. We talked before about trauma. So any of you that have pre-existing trauma, PTSD, that sort of thing, even if it's been resolved, this pandemic will trigger it and bring it up a little bit more. So again, this is like the spoons. You might be feeling extra triggered and having symptoms that maybe you haven't had for a while, like intrusive thoughts or lack of sleep or nightmares or something coming back up. That's a really common thing in the pandemic. We talked about this is a grief and loss process, right? There's life before the pandemic and all the things we were doing, and now there's life after. I work with a lot of seniors in high school. They're devastated, right? That, no graduation, no prom, all these things that they were looking forward to are gone. And so that's a huge grief and loss process. And this is one of those opportunities to connect, like, hey, sweetie, how are you feeling about, having graduation on Zoom or not having prom, and just listening and giving empathy and not trying to fix it, but just being with that experience with them can be very, very powerful. And grief and loss, when it comes up, any unresolved grief and loss comes up with it, right? So sometimes people can be feeling, loss in the pandemic, but it's also bringing up all kinds of loss that came before the pandemic too. And that's quite normal, and getting support for that can be helpful. We talked about chronic illness, right? Of course, the pandemic, for people with pre-existing health conditions, that's why we're staying at home in large part, right? Is to protect those folks and help them out, because they're very high risk right now. So that's going to add stress to them and in an already difficult, situation with just functioning on a daily basis. So, one thing you can do, we talked in the last talk, is just check in on people. If you know people that have chronic illness or mental health issues, check in with them. Just say, hey, how are you doing, right? Addictions. So, addictions can be a lot of different things. It can be food, exercise, alcohol, drugs, gambling, a lot of different things. When is it a problem? So I think a lot of people are drinking more during the pandemic. I'm noticing this being a phenomenon. And I think people, again, if you look at the needs behind it, they are wanting comfort. They are wanting escape. They are just wanting a break, right? A glass of wine or two or something like that, that's probably fine in an evening or a few times a week. But when does it become a problem is when it's really impacting your relationships, your functioning, your health. If you're primarily using it for self-soothing and nothing else, it becomes, obsessive, you can't stop, or you have withdrawal symptoms. Those are all cues that maybe there's something bigger going on. And it's interesting because my insurance company sent me a free behavioral health assessment for addictions right now. And I was like, ooh, this is a cue in that addictions are a thing right now. So again, in the handout, there's some resources and ways that you can look into, like, is my drinking a problem right now? Or the amount of cookies that I'm eating, that sort of thing. Just checking into that for your own self-care. We talked a little bit about, if there was already strife in your household, it can be bigger right now, right? Everybody's under stress. I felt the need to put the domestic violence and abuse slide in here because that's very serious. And if you, are feeling like your safety is at risk, there's all kinds of resources and private lines you can call and get resourced for that. So, it can be emotional, mental, physical, sexual bullying, can be up more. I'm noticing that online, like way more toxic behavior and bullying online and that sort of thing. So, setting boundaries, physical safety is really important. So definitely a resource for yourself, or if you have suspicion of somebody else, reach out to them and see if you can help. The last one is suicide prevention, right? So there are websites, there's this phenomenon, mental health first aid, right? That can be very, very helpful. A lot of folks have suicidal ideation right now or thoughts of self-harm. And a lot of times what's the need underneath it, right, is to escape an experience or a feeling that's too overwhelming for them. And this is another reason why talking about feelings is important, right? Because it's normal to feel overwhelmed right now. And those thoughts can even be somewhat normal, but acting on them, of course, is quite scary and dangerous. So looking for cues of, if people are self-harming or isolating a whole bunch, if you have a friend that you just haven't heard from for a while, like reach out to them. If people are, have access to any kind of means, They constantly express like hopelessness, that sort of thing. Really trying to help them seek professional help is very, very important in that. And, you're not a professional, so, you're not responsible for helping them through that, but definitely resourcing them to a professional is very important. And there's so many helplines now. Like I know in Washington State, we even have this new thing called 211. You just call like 911 and you talk to crisis counselors. So a lot of areas do have that, and I have that in the handout if you have any concerns. So again, when and where to seek help, any of the above that I just talked about, definitely, look into it. There's Google, there's all the stuff in the handout. And just remember too, mental health counseling is not just about, if you are in a crisis. Everybody can benefit from some support from time to time. And I certainly have plenty of people I'm talking to that are like, I'm okay for the most part, but I'm just constantly stressed and I need somebody to talk to, right? Some of my sessions lately have even just been like, I need to talk to somebody besides like my family. And we're just having even more like conversational sessions rather than like working on things. And that is therapeutic for all the reasons that I just talked about. So asking for help is really brave and it's important. And it's a way to, again, do self-care and resource for yourself, which ultimately helps everybody else out in your home and who you're working with. And we're in this together for sure. So just like we talked about before, oxygen mask on you first, then your marriage, your kids, your friends and family, and work, right? And this is about that hierarchy of needs and the foundation and resourcing for that. Once again, realistic expectations. You're not going to be at peak performance, and that's okay. You're probably going to be tired and struggle with motivation. Totally okay. That's very normal from what we can tell in mental health in a pandemic. Just do the best you can. And again, ask for help when you need it. And just know that everybody's stressed. And this is where if you have enough spoons, right, to reach out to people and connect, reach out. So lastly, like I said, the handout this week is pretty dense in resources. So if you have any kind of like, I think my aunt might be drinking too much, or, I'm really fighting with my spouse a lot, or, my kids, and how do I get them motivated? There's lots of stuff in the handout of tangible resources to maybe make some game plans to support or find other resources to help you.
And that concludes the second of 4 sessions from the Only at Buckland Mental Health and Wellness Lecture Series on the Beyond Borders podcast for today. Keep listening to future episodes for the 3rd and 4th sessions. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly at marketing@buckland.com or check the show notes for resources. If you're looking for more resources related to international trade, check out buckland.com and click on the Learning section across the top of the website. Here you'll find a range of resources, including learning guides, webinars, and podcasts. Our downloadable learning guides include Incoterms charts, common trade terminology, how to avoid border delays, and many more. We also have a whole host of on-demand webinars available on our website, available for instant download. So check those out to access free and informative presentations. The best way to keep up to date on all of these resources that I've mentioned is through our weekly newsletter. We send out a newsletter every Wednesday containing our latest resources, as well as a roundup of the latest trade news delivered right to your inbox. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us through our website's Contact Us page, through Twitter, where our handle is @BucklandTweets, on our LinkedIn company page, or on Instagram, where our handle is BucklandInsta. Thank you for listening to the Beyond Borders podcast, and be sure to tune in again and subscribe for more great conversations about importing, exporting, and everything else in the world of logistics and international trade.